we have seen their kind before. They are the heirs of all the murderous ideologies of the 20th century. By sacrificing human life to serve their radical visions, by abandoning every value except the will to power, they follow in the path of fascism, Nazism, and totalitarianism. And they will follow that path all the way to where it ends, in history's unmarked grave of discarded lies. Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. Freedom and fear are at war. The advance of human freedom, the great achievement of our time and the great hope of every time, now depends on us. Our nation, this generation, will lift a dark threat of violence from our people and our future.
When freedom is lost, it is lost forever.
We are losing the right to make our own determinations about what we think, what we eat, how we protect our health, how we protect our children, and whether, in fact, we are members of a free and democratic society.
The purpose of education in America today is not education. It is indoctrination, in internationalism, in collectivism, and in atheism, and they're doing a wonderful job.
They have to destroy the United States Constitution and our way of life. And they've got to do so in such a way that will actually embrace it.
You have to get a hold of the minds of the young.
Why are we beginning to tread on our constitutional rights?
A globalist is someone who believes in globalism, and globalism essentially is the desire for one world government, one world military, one world economy, which on a broad philosophical basis may not be that bad. After all, we are one humanity living on one planet, and frankly, I can see the day coming when somebody's going to say, hey, where do you come from? And you're going to say, I'm from Earth. But the problem is that we are being pushed into globalism by secrecy and by deceit, and nobody's getting a chance to actually consider the ramifications or consider the methodology that's being used to push us into this globalization. And that leads to the $64,000 question. Let's assume that these globalists, and they make no secret about their desire for one world economy, one world government, let's assume that they're successful. What is our guarantee that some new Hitler-like tyrant won't gain control of that worldwide mechanism? The driving force behind globalism is just plain old socialism. Because if they want to control every person in the world, if they're going to take care of you from cradle to grave, if they're going to take care of the education system, they're going to take care of the health system, all of that requires central administration. And the wealthy elite who have the money and the power know that if they can create a one world global social system, that they can control the central authority. In other words, world control, world domination, one of the oldest desires in the history of the world, going all the way back to Alexander the Great.
I'm an international freelance reporter. I have covered over 70 global meetings around the world in the last 11 years. Those meetings include the United Nations General Assembly, the United Nations mega conferences, the Group of Seven, finance ministers meeting, the Group of 8 foreign ministers meeting. I have covered peacekeeping. I have covered NATO. According to history, the United Nations was started as a way in which all the countries of the world would sit around the table and they would talk out their differences. This way, there would be no more wars. And that really was the mantra that was used to get the United Nations or the countries of the world to come together and discuss the idea of a way to end all future wars by sitting around the table. Everything is in place for a world governmental structure. We have a global body that is growing in power. We have a situation whereby a global tax is imminent. The global army is operational, and a global currency is right around the corner. Whether it is on sustainable development, the rights of women, peacekeeping, human rights, disarmament, outer space, the United Nations agenda is very vast and very broad and very huge. No longer are they just concerned with peacekeeping. They literally have branched out into every area of government, whether it is public-private partnership, whether it is sovereignty, whether it is sustainable development, whether it is the definition of family, whether it is the function of women, whether it is the function of peace. The whole agenda of the United Nations is to change how people think.
There is an organized effort in our schools today to indoctrinate our children in internationalism. In other words, belief in the United Nations and certainly to do the thought that we should do away with national sovereignty. There's an organized effort in our schools today to teach children about collectivism and the importance of socialism and reliance upon government to change our society. There's an organized effort within education to destroy the belief in absolutes in our children and to destroy a belief in God. The purpose of education in America today is not education. It is indoctrination, in internationalism, in collectivism, and in atheism, and they're doing a wonderful job.
You think the purpose of education is reading, writing, and arithmetic? The purpose of education is to change the thoughts, actions, and feelings of students. Hitler wanted to control the education system in Germany. Stalin did in Russia, Mao Zedong in China. You have to get a hold of the minds of the young, where you break the person's values. You break their understanding of their individuality. You bring them to consensus with the group. They become a member of the collective. It's Soviet education, basically. Might as well say it. It's Soviet education. There's no right and no wrong anymore. You make up your own mind. Sidney Simon's book, The Values Clarification, decision-making, role-playing, all of these are all psychological techniques to strip the child of any religion. I think that Chisholm went on, to talk about getting rid of religion. He said, we've got to train the teachers, retrain them. This is Brock Chisholm, the Canadian psychiatrist, friend of Alger Hiss. Retrain the teachers as little psychiatrists. Beria, of course, going back to the 30s, he said the most important goal in the United States was to destroy Christianity.
Apparently it's been important to the globalist to attack religion in general and to attack the idea of individual liberty, because of all of those are anathema to the whole concept of globalism. In education, for example, no child left behind. Nobody can be said to be a loser. Well, of course, if there's no losers, then there's no winners. And what you're doing here, this is a socializing process designed to just bring everybody into one mediocrity.
You've got to veer them away from the idea of patriotism towards their country, sovereignty of the nation, a belief in absolutes, right and wrong. You cannot expect to have a smoothly running world socialist system if you have people out there who are going to object to what you're trying to do. So you have to brainwash.
The New Freedom Commission is a federal program to mandate the bogus screening and compulsory medication of children from infancy through 18 years of age in this country. Through the use of completely inappropriate screening techniques, any child who deviates from the prescribed feeling and thought pattern that is allowed to them will be compulsorily medicated, even over the objection of their parents, with dangerous, unproven, and untested psychiatric medications to control their thoughts, their behaviors, and to impede their emotional development. This is a federally mandated program.
The children now are signing what is called an assent form. Not a consent form, but a passive consent form saying that they will be involved. They have all kinds of incentives to join. They give them pizza parties for Teen Screen people. They give them movie rental coupons if they'll do the Teen Screen. And what Teen Screen is it asks them a number of questions. Have you ever been depressed? Are you afraid to speak in a group? Do you feel like your parents are abusing you? Those questions then go in to be analyzed, and a diagnosis is made from those questions. Parents who have found out about this are now suing. They're now very upset, going to the school systems and saying, how dare you do this to my child without my knowledge?
I think it's important to understand that most of the educational programs that are implemented in the United States stem from the National Education Association. And the NEA was actually founded by John D. Rockefeller. And John D. Rockefeller, I think, voiced the beliefs of this ruling elite that wants to try to homogenize our education system when he was quoted as saying, I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. So I think the education system is not only pushing people into a socialized version of government, but also dumbing the individual down to the point to where he'll be a good worker in the factory, or he'll be a good worker in Silicon Valley. He may know a lot about computers, but he is not going to have a classic education that would allow him to take all of the facets of the culture and the society and put it together and really form an intelligent opinion as to what's really going on and what might be in the best interest of the individual.
One of the topics that is taboo is any discussion whatsoever about shadow government. Now, 10 years ago in the early 90s, when people called in mainstream talk shows and brought up issues like the Council on Foreign Relations or the Trilateral Commission, in some cases there was one major talk show who proudly says he's got half of his brain tied behind his back, actually said on the radio that there was no such thing as the Council on Foreign Relations, and anybody brought that up was a conspiracy, wacko, kook, wingnut, etc., etc. Now we all know, of course, that the Council of Foreign Relations is a very real organization. It's been around for a long, long time. America forms its opinions by information that's provided to them. And common sense will tell you that if the information that you get from your mainstream media is misinformation or disinformation or even a lie, then common sense will tell you that the opinion is an extension of the lie. Now, unfortunately, America, and indeed the rest of the world, is getting information that's being massaged, it's being spun, it's being prepared for them for consumption. And when we watch the mainstream media, it's really easy to recognize this after a while because, the mainstream media usually carries three major stories as a continuing, ongoing investigation. And of course, they intersperse other unimportant stories in between. So while America is continually watching stories about Michael Jackson or Scott Peterson or Natalie Holloway, or sometimes they'll get really controversial and they'll talk about some of the scandals in Washington, the Valerie Plame issue. there are all kinds of things happening behind the scenes while America and the rest of the world focuses on these big 3 news stories that are, of course, paraded in front of America 24/7 and told that this is real news.
Media blackout is nothing more than media control. It is the determination of what the public will hear, what they will not hear, and how to make it sound in such a way that the public will accept it. And it is totally against everything this country stands for, but the average person doesn't even know that they're experiencing it anytime they turn on the TV.
Well, I think that there's 2 things going on, really. There's the one aspect of media where it's a business, and they're going to put out whatever sells the most. And there are some who would say that, well, people just like the gruesome, what makes them afraid. So that's why you see that more than any other kind of news. And then there's the other theory that there's actually a mass conditioning going on. So ever since industrialization and when people couldn't control their populations through physical force, there needed to be a measure of brainwashing so that people would basically enslave themselves and think that they were happy. And if people think they're happy, why would they ever rebel?
I don't trust the media because I think they create the news rather than reporting it.
I assume that consumers are supposed to have brains and use them when they get news. So of course you should be thinking when you're getting news and not just trusting. And to me that's just axiomatic for listening to another person. So it's not so much that I'm more taken in by news people than anyone else. Our president said a couple of weeks ago, we don't torture people, and you wonder why he thinks we don't torture people since most of the rest of the world thinks we do, including many Americans. And he also said if we're doing it to squash terrorism, it's legal. Well, Richard Nixon said if a president does it, it's legal. That's just not something to be accepted without thinking.
I don't entirely trust the information I get from the mass media. I take it all with a grain of salt.
Okay, we say we've got freedom of press in this country, and some folks have said that you've got freedom of press as long as you own it. Well, who owns the media? And when I say that, I mean it not literally, but as far as who controls the information that goes out in the media. An example, NBC is owned by General Electric, and General Electric is one of the top 10, if not top 5 defense contractors. Is NBC going to expose a news story that might in some way impede a contract negotiation, which can mean a lot of money for General Electric? I don't think so. So the point here is that we have elected officials, both Republicrats and Demopublicans, that cater to who? Certainly not the common people. We don't have the huge amounts of money to contribute to their election campaigns. The people that contribute the most amount of money are the corporations. And so that representative or senator is going to do what is going to be in the best interest of those corporations. So if the corporations are controlling and influencing our elected officials, we must also take a look at the mainstream media. Who pays the bulk of the advertising dollars that keep the mainstream network news going? Is the major corporations. So what we have now is we have corporate control of elected officials, corporate control of the media, and this is why some people are now calling it the corporate Borg, because they have assimilated several different areas of our entire society. The corporations control agriculture, technology, manufacturing, industry, education, communication. They control our elected officials. This is not a government of, by, and for the people. It is a government of, by, and for the corporation. And by definition, when business controls government, that is inescapably fascism.
It might come as a shock to many people, but the form of government we have in this country today basically is socialistic. We have social programs for everything. We have educational programs to bring the curriculum around to what the national education authorities want. And basically we have a socialist program, but instead of the benefits going to the people, the benefits go to the corporations. Okay? So I think anyone that stops and looks at it would agree that we have socialism geared to benefit the multinational corporations. Now, interestingly enough, this is pushed along by a fervent nationalism. What's good for GM is good for the country, okay? And our country, right or wrong. And we're going to go take our form of freedom and democracy to some other country. If you don't like it, we'll just invade you and occupy you, okay? Now, what does that tell us? That tells us that the form of government that we're operating under today is National Socialism. And that should come as a shock to many people, particularly when you consider that National Socialism in German, shortened down, means Nazi. So, because the Nazi Party was the National Socialist German Workers' Party, National Socialist Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, okay? And so they shortened it to Nazis. And by the way, that was a form of fascism, okay? And the man who coined the term fascism was Benito Mussolini in Italy. But Benito Mussolini himself said that fascism really wasn't the proper term, that it more correctly should have been called corporatism. And that is simply when you have the corporations running the country and controlling the government. Now, this is what we saw in fascist Italy. This is what we saw in Nazi Germany. But the difference is this. In those countries, but before World War II, the state took over the corporations. In the United States today, the corporations have taken over the state. But the end result's the same.
The question comes up about the intelligence agencies. There's some 14 intelligence agencies in the United States. I mean, there's the FBI and the CIA and the DIA and the NSC, and there's Army intelligence and Navy intelligence and Air Force intelligence and Coast Guard intelligence and probably a couple of other intelligence agencies I don't know about. They have always worked together through the defense intelligence agencies. And when the government tries to tell you that there was no communication among these agencies, they're simply just not telling you the truth. Prior to 9/11, Putin of Russia warned that there was going to be a terrorist attack on the United States. The German intelligence warned us, the Moroccan intelligence warned us, the Jordanian intelligence warned us, even Mullah Omar, head of the Taliban, warned us, the Mossad warned us the attack was coming on the United States. On the 6th of August, and this was brought up by the 9/11 Commission, on the 6th of August, why the President received a briefing, the presidential daily briefing, which said, Osama bin Laden determined to attack in the United States, and the attack talked about hijacking American planes. And yet, both the leaders of the FBI and the CIA said, well, we knew an attack was coming, but we were certain it was going to be overseas. How could they have possibly given the president a briefing on the 6th of August said, Osama bin Laden determined to attack in the United States? And they tell us that the attack is coming overseas? They're simply lying to the American people. And the tragedy is, it doesn't matter how ridiculous something is, if you say it often enough, most Americans will believe it.
We were told that 19 Muslim fanatics somehow bypassed our $40 billion defense system, hijacked 4 planes simultaneously, causing their transponders to go off almost at the exact same time. We're totally lost from FAA radar, not to mention satellite radar and NORAD radar, made their way to New York and crashed into 2 prominent landmarks, the 2 towers of the World Trade Center. And then another one crashed into the Pentagon. And then another one crashed in Pennsylvania. And all of this under the direction of a Muslim cleric hiding in a cave in Afghanistan with a computer. Now, if that ain't about the craziest conspiracy theory I ever heard, and yet that is what we are expected to accept as the legitimate version of what happened on 9/11.
We've heard eyewitness accounts and testimony from fire officials that indicate that there were bombs, explosives, possibly detonating charges that were utilized in the collapse of the World Trade Center buildings.
In the documentary, 9/11 in Plain Sight, video and photographic evidence is used to point out a number of discrepancies in the official story of September the 11th. we were all told that a Boeing 757 crashed into the Pentagon. However, photographs taken only moments after the impact show a hole that is only approximately 16 feet in diameter. As the host, Dave Von Kleist, asked the audience, how does an airplane that has a wingspan of over 124 feet fit into a 16-foot hole and not leave any wreckage on the outside of the building? Other inconsistencies at the Pentagon include on-the-scene eyewitnesses, many of which describe a much smaller aircraft and the distinct smell of special weapons-grade explosives known as cordite. Why didn't the media report these inconsistencies? Instead, the mainstream media concentrated their coverage on video footage of the E-ring after a gigantic structural collapse which occurred almost a half hour later. Why didn't they show the world the actual impact damage? Why didn't they show us the 16-foot hole? Instead, they chose to ignore the first 30 minutes of the attack at the Pentagon and to present what could be interpreted as deliberately misleading information.
One of my experiences in the Army was being in charge of the Army's imagery interpretation for scientific and technical intelligence during the Cold War. I measured pieces of Soviet equipment from photographs. It was my job. I look at the hole in the Pentagon, and I look at the size of an airplane that was supposed to have hit the Pentagon, and I said, the plane does not fit in that hole. So what did hit the Pentagon? What hit it? Where is it? What's going on?
Some folks find the very thought of government involvement in the attacks on September 11th as absolutely repugnant. But as they say, if we forget our history, we're destined to repeat it. So let's go back a few years to 1961 and look at the Northwoods document. The Northwoods document was drawn up by the Joint Chiefs, and in it they planned on shooting down our own planes, sinking our own battleships, and conducting terrorist activity so that they could blame it on the Cubans during the Cuban Missile Crisis. As an example, in the Northwoods document, they discuss about an aircraft at Eglin Air Force Base that could be painted and numbered as an exact duplicate for a civil registered aircraft belonging to a CIA proprietary organization in the Miami area. At a designated time, the duplicate would be substituted for the actual civil aircraft and would be loaded with the selected passengers, all boarded under carefully prepared aliases. The actual registered aircraft would be converted to a drone. Now, their plan was obviously to generate hostility from the American people towards the Cubans so that they could justify military activity. And again, the concept about military contractors comes into play because there's a lot of money to be made from war and from military action. We need look no further than the Carlyle Group and Halliburton and Brown and Root. What's going on today? Is history repeating itself? Is it possible that if the Joint Chiefs demonstrated that they had a plan and were willing to substitute aircraft and shoot one down to blame it on some innocent people, is it possible that they would do that in today's world? Is it possible that the aircraft that attacked on September 11th were not the commercial airliners at all?
It becomes very clear that if there were indeed government involvement in the September 11th terrorist attacks, as clearly outlined in the 1962 Northwoods document, that there would also have to be a mass manipulation, if not outright control, of the mainstream media in order to shape the way the news was being reported, in order to set the brainwashing machine into motion. On the morning of September the 11th, there was a lot of video footage and photographs taken of the second tower being struck by the second plane. Fox News interviewed on live television one of their own employees, a Mr. Mark Bernbach, who stated on live television that the plane he personally witnessed crash into the South Tower didn't even appear to be a commercial airliner. Numerous eyewitnesses appeared on other mainstream news networks and made similar statements. The personal testimony of these eyewitnesses was seen once on live television as they were being interviewed by the reporters, and then that news footage was never seen or reported again. The sheer number of inconsistencies with the official story of what happened that morning are overwhelming. Something is being hidden from the American people, and given the fact that the United States government has declared a worldwide war on terrorism, which affects every single person on this planet, someone really needs to ask the question, why haven't we been given all the facts?
The mass media in the United States is the fourth arm of the government, literally. It is comprised of people that come directly out of the government, people who are involved in the government, people who represent the government. The mass media is nothing more than the manner in which they will work to control the American people over a period of time, insidiously, one step at a time, bringing them to the consensus of what they want them to be, what they want them to feel, and what they want them to see as being the truth.
Well, there is an example in history of a republic and in a country filled with educated and cultured people who, in the space of a month, changed into an empire because there was damage to a prominent building, and then immediate legislation was passed, anti-terrorist legislation, and the whole country shifted from a republic to an empire. And this was not the United States, this was Germany in 1933. And it started off as the Weimar Republic, but by the end of January of 1933, the Reichstag, their parliament building, had burned down, and Hitler and the Nazis blamed it on communist terrorists, and it later turned out that they themselves had said it. And then they passed through the Enabling Act, which was national gun registration, national identity cards. They set up detention centers for terrorists and dissenters, which quickly turned into the concentration camps. And Germany was no longer a republic, it became the Third Reich, or empire, the Third Empire. And so we can see that that's happened within living memory. There are plenty of people living in the United States today who lived through that in Germany, and the irony and the parallels are not lost on them.
If they're going to have a global system of government, what type of government would that be? Of course, there are those now that are touting the UN as the only answer because our system is all flawed and our leaders are all screwed up and there's too much corruption here. Well, they want to bring forward this world government through the UN Charter. Many people that support the UN Charter have never read it. And if they had read it and figured out where it came from and compared the UN Charter to the United States Constitution, they'll find that they're absolutely repugnant. You can't have them coexisting. So common sense tells me that if the globalists want a one-world government, they have to destroy the United States Constitution and our way of life. And they've got to do so in such a way that will actually embrace it.
I know many citizens have fears tonight, and I ask you to be calm and resolute, even in the face of a continuing threat. So tonight I announce the creation of a cabinet-level position, reporting directly to me, the Office of Homeland Security.
As a direct result of the September 11th attacks, The Bush administration saw to the creation of the USA Patriot Act and the formation of the Department of Homeland Security. The USA Patriot Act circumvents the U.S. Constitution and invalidates most of our treasured rights in this country. It may seem perfectly acceptable to most Americans that they would have to relinquish some of their rights to gain some sense of safety, but somewhere along the way, someone forgot the fact that it's not our government that gives us our freedoms. They are inalienable rights, and they cannot be taken away. The people of the United States have simply been conditioned to give their rights away freely. The USA Patriot Act seems less of a tool to fight terrorism and more of an instrument to monitor and track and intimidate everyday law-abiding citizens in this country. It is a blueprint for a modern-day, American-style Soviet Union.
Some in this chamber and in our country did not support the liberation of Iraq.
The Patriot Act defines the term domestic terrorism in such broad terms that anyone who might simply speak out about the current administration or engage in political protest could be labeled as a domestic terrorist.
When we're talking about chasing down terrorists, we're talking about getting a court order before we do so.
The U.S. government can monitor all internet activity and phone conversations of any person, anywhere, anytime. Law enforcement officers have the legal authority to break into your home and conduct sneak and peek searches of your belongings. They can do this at any time without your knowledge and without your consent, and they can do this without the need for probable cause and without a search warrant.
The terrorist threats against us will not expire at the end of the year, and neither should the protections of the Patriot Act.
U.S. citizens may be incarcerated indefinitely without charges ever being filed, without access to an attorney, without access to the courts, without a phone call, and completely without due process.
How did you let this happen? Wake up out there. You know, it's your children. Don't you care? Look what these people are doing to you.
The public is being manipulated into adopting these policies because they are not aware they're taking place. They're done at such a high level at the United Nations and at levels above that the public doesn't even see this taking place. They're more concerned with what's happening in Aruba, or they're more concerned about the latest collegiate abduction because that's what they're being force-fed from the media, and they don't know that there is a world court. The average person has no idea that there's a world court or imminent world police. And that is the sad part, is it's being done without their knowledge.
As a psychiatrist, I remember very well the condemnation by the American Psychiatric Association of Soviet psychiatrists and the Soviet Union for their use of psychiatric techniques and psychiatric medications to control political dissidents. Sadly, shockingly, we in the United States have become those same oppressors. We now have a policy, as exemplified by the FBI brochure from the Phoenix Office on Counterterrorism, which says people who are defenders of the U.S. Constitution against federal government and the UN, and make numerous references to the U.S. Constitution, should be monitored as potentially murderous and fanatical terrorists. By extension, should be considered mentally unstable. Under the New Freedom Commission, mentally unstable people must be medicated on a compulsory basis with lethal and untested but very profitable psychiatric medications.
In this country now, we're seeing drugs cradle to grave. In fact, it's not just in America, it's in other countries also. Children as young as 2 years of age are being put on certain types of drugs to decrease the amount of their aggressive tendencies. When they're evaluated and felt to be just too aggressive at 2 years of age, they place them on a drug. All the way up and through high school into adults, and of course we know how the adults are being affected by drugs like Prozac, Zoloft, Wellbutrin, and being placed on these for all kinds of reasons. The drugs are being used all the way through the adult period of life into the geriatric. When I was a director of nursing in a nursing home, I would see these people being medicated so severely to keep them quiet, to keep them from doing anything, having any feelings. They were easier to maintain in bed than they were to get out. And this is a horrible situation that we have evolved into in this country. And of course, now with Alzheimer's, it makes it even worse, the medication of these elderly people. So we have now a system that finds a reason to medicate everybody. Now, this is absolutely bizarre when you consider that freedom of fill in the blank is what this country is all about. And yet, under the guise of a diagnosis, whether it's accurate or not, these people will then be forcibly drugged and helped or hindered. Who knows? Who knows what will happen as a result of these deleterious drugs that are given in combinations and amounts that many times are not safe.
Yeah, there is a war on freedom. And we're being told over and over and over again that we need to support George Bush and we have to support the war in Iraq and we have to support this war on terror and we have to support all these laws that are coming by because, of course, they're all here to protect us. And yet when you look at things like the Patriot Act, this allows the FBI or any law enforcement agency to utilize what they call sneak and peek. They can go into your house when you're not home and they can go through all of your stuff and without your ever knowing about it. How is this protecting your rights? That's just one example where we get to think we're free. You know, on the patriotic holidays, we all break out our flags and we wave them around and we sing patriotic songs like I'm proud to be American, where I get to think I'm free.
In the fall of 2005, a scandal erupted that stretched on into 2006 about President Bush using the National Security Agency to monitor and to essentially spy upon American citizens. And of course, on one hand, you had people who said, well, we have to have these powers to locate and track the terrorist. And then you had people on the other side saying this is a grave, invasion of privacy. If the history of the United States was one that had always used such powers correctly and only against true enemies of this country, I would be a whole lot more supportive. But when you go back and look at history, you go back to the Red Scares of the 20s when J. Edgar Hoover was sending the FBI against political dissidents and against political parties. You go to the COINTEL program of the 70s when Nixon and the FBI were being used against race groups. COINTEL program was used against Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They were targeting peaceful dissent. And that's just anathema to a free society. And even in the current spying scandal, we find that most of the targets were not Islamic fascists, they were environmental groups and anti-war groups. So I think we have to be extremely careful in giving these types of spying powers to any government, because historically it has only been proved that they will use it against their political enemies.
The average American would be so shocked to find out there's something called COINTELPRO, the FBI's covert action programs against American citizens. That's the name of their document, the government document, not my rendition of it. In fact, it is Report 94-755 called Supplementary Detailed Staff Reports of Intelligence Activities and the Rights of Americans. This is a hearing that occurred in 1976. Now, some notable people that sat on this hearing: Philip Hart, Walter Mondale, Gary Hart, Howard Baker, Barry Goldwater, and Richard Schweiker. Now, this Senate report tells what the FBI was doing against the American citizens, literally. Here's their statement. COINTELPRO began in 1956, in part because of the frustration with the Supreme Court rulings limiting the government's power to proceed overtly against dissident groups. It ended in 1971 with the threat of public exposure. But in the intervening 15 years, the Bureau conducted, their terms, a sophisticated vigilante operation aimed squarely at preventing the exercise of First Amendment rights of speech and association. This is incredible. When you look at this, and when I was able to get a copy of this document, which is over 3,000 pages long, I was shocked. I had no idea that the U.S. government had been involved in the control of the American people in the 1960s and 70s in the manner that they did. One of the purposes of COINTELPRO was to, number one, promote national security, number two, to prevent violence, which it did not, because it had a lot of violence in the program itself. But number three, listen to this. The agency has the duty, the FBI, has the duty to do whatever is necessary to combat perceived threats to the existing social and political order. Notice, there's no mention of protecting First Amendment rights, of protecting any rights, of protecting any constitutional rights, Bill of Rights, nothing other than the prevailing, existing social and political order.
One of the things we're doing is developing all sorts of technology, not to spy on the Russians, not to spy on the Chinese, not to spy on Osama bin Laden, but to control the American people. We have satellites. Are they monitoring what's going on in Russia or China today, or are they watching what's going on in the United States? We have a program known as Echelon, where they listen to every telephone call, every email, record every fax here in the United States. And all of this is done by computers. All of these messages are kept indefinitely on computer disks. What the American people must understand is that the massive amounts of money we're spending on defense is not to protect America, but ultimately to be used to control the American population as we move from freedom to fascism.
Community policing is a program that was introduced under the Clinton administration. It was authorized and funded under the Violent Crime Act of 1994. Community policing is a theory that individual rights have broke down the moral fiber of society. It's a hodgepodge of every ideology and every religion on the planet, pretty much. There's a piece of everything in there. They're trying to make it a fair and a just world for everyone, but for no one in particular. And basically what the law does at the national and international level is protect global trading rights over national and local businesses. And at the local level, communitarian law balances the rights of the individuals against the rights of the community at large. The new police are targeting average people. First, they're targeted in the meetings by the local stakeholders that'll come. They'll invite the citizens to come in and identify the problems in the neighborhood or how they're going to build a better community. It's all tied into rebuilding community. It's the same MO in Iraq as it is in the United States. A small group of paid facilitators, professional advisors come to the community and they start holding what they call either stakeholder meetings or visionings, and they want to talk about the future, and they want everyone at the meetings to help them identify the values that they'd like to maintain in the community and what the standards are in the community. And in these meetings, they also ask people to identify problems in the neighborhood, and so this is your opportunity, if you're that kind of a person, to go in and talk about that neighbor down the street that is always working on his car, or he's got a loud motorcycle that his friends are always coming over at 2 o'clock in the morning. I've heard a lot of different petty little neighborhood complaints come up in these meetings, and then they go from that point to maybe they need to investigate this person, investigate their friends a little bit more. I kind of narrowed it down to you're either an asset or you're a problem. And then if you're identified as an asset, then they'll have your specific skills and abilities. They have interviews that were designed by Jody Kurtzman and John McKnight at Northwestern University, Evanston, Illinois. It's an 11-page interview of questions Very in-depth questions, whether you know how to bathe a 6-month-old baby, if you can take care of elderly people, can you cook, can you sew, can you clean, can you vacuum, can you wash windows. It's very detailed. It also has your fraternal and political affiliations, your personal information, your home address, your age, any dreams or desires you might have about starting a business. It's very detailed. That is part of the database. They've got numerous ways of gathering the data. It's been a top priority since the 92 Declaration at Rio came out. You'll have absolutely no private feelings, no private thoughts, no private hopes, no private dreams. The types of information that they want, it just gets more invasive with every program that I see.
It was Henry Kissinger who said that power is the greatest aphrodisiac of all. And I believe that this is what motivates these people who work behind the scenes. But there are people who actually give themselves over to the dark side, and they're well rewarded in this life.
Between 1994 and 1995, I had one of the most intimidating experiences I've ever known. It was at the time that I was going to release a news story that George Bush Sr. was responsible for the deaths of Gulf War veterans and the transfer of biologicals and chemicals to Iraq during the 1980s. And prior to doing that, I had notified his office that we were going to be releasing this information. I was working alone in my office in my home in Houston, Texas, at about midday when everybody was at work, and lo and behold, my office began to shake. It was shaking so violently, I almost had the fax machine drop the phone off of it. I couldn't imagine what was taking place, so I went out on a balcony right alongside the office. Looking up, I saw the biggest helicopter, the closest helicopter I have ever seen, hovering over the house. I called a friend of mine who knew that I was going to be doing this, going to be releasing this information, and I said, "What do I do?" And he said, "Well, I would get out of the house." So I went downstairs with my keys and went to open the door to the garage. And lo and behold, as I opened the garage door to back out, there was a Crown Victoria with its rear end up against my car. So there was no way that I could leave at that point. I went back upstairs. I called him, and he said, "Well, I think this is simply intimidation." So I learned early on that there are people that don't want information out. There are people that are not happy about people that do speak out. But I decided that fear was not going to control my life, and I've continued to tell the truth as I know it since that time.
My dad was a professional soldier, and my grandfather was a professional cop. And they were not the same job. I never, once in my life, heard my dad say anything other than if you asked him what his job was, he would tell you that he was a professional killer, and that his job was to kill enemies of the United States. And police officers do not swear to kill anyone, they swear to protect and defend. They're not the same job. When the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense merged in 1998, it's in their joint technology report, that they basically, that police and soldiers basically do the same job now. Under the legislation in 1994, the Violent Crime Act in 1994 has a lot of the new programs were embedded inside that legislation that authorized the distribution of technology and equipment that was left over from the Cold War. They got permission to start sharing it with the local police in the late 90s. The American police are working in two joint programs, one with former KGB agents and Israeli Mossad. They're going back and forth to Israel. JINSA's sponsoring some of the trips. They're calling Israel the Harvard of anti-terrorism and training American police how to assassinate potential terrorists by shooting them in the head rather than in the chest, as American cops were formerly trained. So most all of the training now, it seems to me, to be between the police and the Army has blended to the point where I don't think that there is a difference anymore. I think that it's all in name, really.
Interestingly enough, it's probably the military people that understand the dangers of posse comitatus more than anyone else. The use of the military, or integrating the military into the law enforcement establishment, is something that the military understand the danger of. And hopefully people will see this and realize it for what it is and stop it while we can.
This has been our protection against a military dictatorship. President Bush has advocated doing away with posse comitatus, using the military to establish a dictatorship in case of an emergency. What's even more significant is that leaders of the Pentagon are totally against this, saying, we are not trained for police action, we're trained for combat. We would have to change our training. The military, this is not the function of the military. But President Bush wants the ability and the power to establish a military dictatorship.
We are absolutely violating our own laws on posse comitatus, because the federalized military is not, I say again, is not authorized under posse comitatus to do civilian police work. But we're doing it. And we're doing it in a way that says, oh, well, we must, because that's the only way we'll get the job done right now. But no one in Congress has raised a hand and said, should we authorize that? Should we allow that? Is that the direction that this country is going? That we're going to have martial law because of a hurricane?
Back during the Reagan administration, when George Herbert Walker Bush was primarily in charge, and Colonel Oliver North was deeply involved in the Iran-Contra scandal, as it came to be known, North issued some plans for the military takeover of the United States for martial law. And among the things that they said they would activate martial law against were, one would be a nuclear war, which is somewhat understandable, but also widespread dissent of a U.S. invasion abroad. So according to plans that were laid back in the 80s, if enough people said they're against the war, then they could declare martial law.
There has been a lot of stuff that's been laid down in the backgrounds of the recent laws that gives the Secretary of Health and Human Services an appointed official, not an elected official that has any accountability to the general public, really control over what is used in terms of a vaccine or drugs, who is going to be rounded up and quarantined, and who is going to be examined that they might be infectious.
Back in the 1980s, during the Reagan administration, there was a project called Rex 84 that was released. And in this project, or this plan, they called for all the bases that were being closed down from the budget cuts, the military budget cuts. These bases closed down. However, when you go back to some of these bases today and take a look at them, there's a very interesting thing that's occurred. The military bases used to have fences with barbed wire that faced out to keep people from the outside from getting into a secure area. Now a lot of these bases that have been closed down has the barbed wire facing in, as if to keep people from the inside from getting out. Now, why would this occur? Is it possible that there is or was a long-term plan that would eventually anticipate rounding up large numbers of people to withhold them? Now, we apply this into a scenario today. We know that we've got these terrible terrorists all over the world that want to do us harm. And we know that there's the threat of chemical and biological attack. In the event that there was a biological attack, or maybe an outbreak of a virus or a flu, and the powers that be had a plan for mandatory vaccinations for everybody undoubtedly there would be a lot of people, myself included, that would refuse to take a mandatory vaccine. Is it possible that they've anticipated this and are going to want to round up all the people that refuse to comply and hold them in detention centers for their own good? Is it possible that this whole plan has been in place for decades?
As a result of my experience in the military, I was vaccine injured, and I've made sort of a statement that I will never take another vaccine as long as I live, nor will I ever give another vaccine. I had no idea the damages that could be caused by vaccines, the dangers involved.
There were a couple of things that George Bush made a comment about with the bird flu. One was he pushed forward the agenda to give the pharmaceutical company complete liability protection by saying incorrectly that the pharmaceutical companies need to be protected, that the reason that they aren't getting into the vaccine business is because they're being sued for their inferior products. The other thing that he talked about was the fact that this could be such a rampant pandemic that we would have to pull out the National Guard, possibly mobilize the military in order to quarantine and containment. It's actually been shown in the literature that those types of enforcement arms aren't very effective. And like I said, people who are very sick, they self-quarantine. I mean, when you've got a bad case of the flu, you're not out going to the grocery store, you're home in bed. So to be able to enforce people to do that is really heavy-handed.
Cooperation is mandatory in a communitarian society. You will do what you are told, and they have the techniques and they have the technology to invade pretty much every area of your life.
We've already talked to the police. The police departments in various countries are already getting involved of how they are going to be enrolled in the whole process of mandatory quarantine, and perhaps even things like directing traffic to the vaccinations to the schools where the vaccines are being administered, because there'll be enough people, because they run on a basis of fear, that will stampede to the local place that's giving the vaccine because they aren't informed and they don't understand what's in the vaccine or what the problems are that are associated with it. But the 25% that decide, or the percentage of whatever that says, I don't want to have anything to do with that, the enforcement arm could very well come through the national ID card or something along those lines that shows proof of vaccination.
They're trying to get the American people to take a national ID card. It's simply an identification card that will have all of your personal information on it. And it is what they do in every totalitarian country. America's been different than other countries because we limited the power of our federal government. The national ID card will allow the federal government to know your every action, your every transaction, and to track you from early morning until late at night, 24 hours a day, from the day you're born until the day you die.
RFID stands for Radio Frequency Identification. It's a technology that uses miniature computer chips. Some of these are smaller than a grain of sand to track items from a distance. And they're hooked up to little miniature antennas. The combination is called an RFID tag. Now, each of these little chips has a unique identification number that's sort of like a social security number for things. Big companies like Procter & Gamble, Walmart, Gillette, and even our own government, including the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, and the U.S. Postal Service, would like to put one of these RFID tags on every manufactured item on planet Earth, and they're already putting them into some identity documents like U.S. passports and potentially driver's licenses. RFID radio waves can travel through solid objects like purses, backpacks, wallets, shirts, shoes, and communicate their number to reader devices in the environment. And these reader devices can be hidden in doorways, under floor tiles, and ceiling tiles, and secretly, silently, and invisibly glean this unique RFID number from the objects that people are wearing and carrying. And of course, this number is more than just a number. I mean, it can link to unlimited information in a database about the product from the time it's manufactured to the time it's disposed. It could have the identity of the person carrying the object on it, perhaps even linked to credit information about the person who purchased it. The government already is buying private data on consumers, and many of us don't even know it. And they're mining this data to find patterns and find people of interest. Right now it happens to be terrorists. Of course, tomorrow, who is a person of interest might change. And while they say today they just want to use this in the warehouses to track widgets from point A to point B, we know that they have other plans. My co-author, Kathleen Albrecht, and I found patent applications at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. One of them is by a company, IBM, and it's called Identification and Tracking of Persons Using RFID Tagged Items. IBM talks about the government using this technology to track people in public places with something they call the Person Tracking Unit. And the places they want to track people include airports, train stations, bus stations, libraries, sports arenas, museums, theaters, elevators, and even restrooms. These tags, if they're on all the products, and these scanners, if they're ubiquitous, as is the plan by major corporations, we could have a Big Brother surveillance society.
In Texas, you must have your premises registered. Then you must tag every animal. When I say animal, we're talking about chickens in your backyard. I'm talking about your kids' rabbits that they have for a 4-H project. And they have even gone so far in Texas as to say pet birds. In other words, if you have a pair of parakeets or parrots, then Grandma's going to have a tag and a premise ID for her parrots. And if she doesn't have, she can be fined $1,000 per day for every day that she does not have those animals tagged properly. I've talked to a lot of Texans that think this animal ID thing, it's great. See, we broadcast in Texas. We have radio affiliates in Texas. And until I came on and talked about it, they thought, this was really going to help because it was going to stop the mad cow disease if it came about. They don't realize how much freedom is being lost there. And besides, if you sell an animal, or if an animal dies, you have to let the Department of Agriculture know where that animal is. If it's dead, you have to let them know that it died. There's no way you can do this. There's no way ranchers in Texas know when animals die. We're talking about big country. We're talking about sections of land. A section 640 acres, and it's nothing to have 10, 15, 20 sections of land, particularly in southwest Texas. They don't know when the coyotes kill a calf. They have no idea. It just comes up missing at gathering time. If they can make this animal ID thing work, if they can tag every cow, sheep, pig, chicken, dog, cat, parrot, whatever it happens to be, and they can make people get a premise number, and if they can make people get a tag in those animals, then they're going to be able to make you and I be tagged exactly the same way.
There is a document called The Revolution in Military Affairs and Conflict Short of War, written by Stephen Metz and James Kivett, and it is from the U.S. Army War College, part of Strategic Studies Institute, dated 1994. And the interesting thing about this is that it refers to a device that will be implanted under the skin, to which it cannot be removed, and it will be referred to as this IPLD, Individual Position Locator Device. In fact, it states that every American could receive an IPLD permanently implanted under the skin with automatic remote activation.
The problem with RFID identification, although you might be able to justify it, say, this way we're going to be able to identify our animals, we're going to be able to identify our pets, we're even going to be able to identify our children if they're kidnapped. The difficulty is, of course, it gives the government the ability to track every individual in America 24 hours a day.
The implantable chip is something that's only just now in the past few years been discussed openly. When it first came, when the discussion first started about 10 or 15 years ago, anybody that brought it up was looked at as some sort of a conspiracy nut. And now it's being accepted as common knowledge. They're talking about putting chips in our products They're talking now about putting chips in people so that they can have their medical records and their bank records readily accessible, and that's how it's being sold. But what they're not focusing on is the possibility that this could be used to control people. And I don't think that it's a very far leap to realize that this is exactly what the long-term goal is to be able to keep track of people, invade your privacy, and control you.
We've been told that special forces in all of the military branches are now being chipped. And of course, the reason being that if they're a POW, they'll be easier to find. And that's a reason that is a good reason. And that's the problem, because utilizing all this technology has so many benefits to it, to the manufacturer, to use an RFID chip in all of their items, to track them, to be able to track people on the roads, to be able to track their speed. But the obverse has to be looked at, which is we lose our civil rights. We lose our freedom.
There have always been those who wanted to control others. There have always been those who believed that they were born to rule and the others were born to serve. And today there are people in key positions in our government who believe in an authoritarian society. And they're working to take away our freedom, to centralize all power in Washington, D.C., and to create a horror for the future.
To understand the true motives behind some of this legislation and some of these contingency plans and some of these regulations, you only have to read George Orwell's book, 1984. And you find that back in 1948, when this was written, they foresaw a future society where everyone was just a cog in the machine and everyone was labeled, numbered, identified, and this was before the age of the computer. So they've been working at this for some time, but now it's coming to fruition thanks to digitization and computerization.
Let's think outside the cage for a second. If we are indeed moving towards an Orwellian 1984 scenario, and if information is being controlled and withheld and manipulated and massaged to direct the people towards a certain agenda, doesn't common sense also tell us that for those that refuse to fit into the mold, that continually think outside of the cage, those people are going to have to be somehow discredited. They're going to have to be ridiculed. They're going to have to be demonized and persecuted.
The U.S. government is increasingly putting money toward military operations, referred to as military operations other than war. These are often seen as non-lethal weapons. DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, has a number of weapons that they call soft kill weapons. The weapons sort of where you wish you were dead, you just weren't killed when they were used, because they can be very painful, they can be very damaging. Acoustic weapons that can destroy the hearing of people, lasers that destroy sight, microwave weapons, active denial weapons, as they're called. One that is now being utilized in Iraq called Project Sheriff. These weapons are devastating. They can cause intense burning. I mean, real intense burning, up to 120, 130 degrees, in which an individual feels as though they're about to die, and unless the laser or the microwave is removed from them, there is no relief from the pain. What frightens me is that these weapons are used not for a war zone, but for a community, a city, a riot control situation.
I think their end goal is to find some way to reverse our freedoms and our rights to do the things that have been guaranteed us by our Constitution. And I think that our president in particular wishes to skirt his responsibilities and take advantage of doing what he wants without having legal permission worldwide and also in the United States. I think our forefathers would roll over in their graves knowing that we were rescinding as many rights to fight a war that is an unjust, immoral, and illegal war. And I think that there's a larger plan behind this. I think that the reason they're doing that is not just to protect this country or its people, but I think it's to control the people. I think it is in an effort to take freedoms away so that our people en masse don't know what's really happening, and they keep them in a state of fear. And if they're in a state of fear, they're easy to control.
The Founding Fathers pledged their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor. I don't think it's too far of a leap to understand that your elected officials are certainly not going to pledge their lives. They're not going to pledge a penny of their fortune. And by these two, they demonstrate that they have no sacred honor. How many of your elected officials have sons or daughters that are serving in the Iraq War? I think you start to understand what's going on here. We, the people, are their cannon fodder. They have sent our sons and daughters to fight their wars so that they can have their spoils. This is what it's all about. It's imperialism and it's fascism. And some folks hear that and say, oh, you must be anti-patriotic or anti-government. I am not anti-government. This government is supposed to be of, by, and for the people. This government is supposed to be following the guidelines or the rule book, which is called the United States Constitution.
Here's where I think that we have the power, is that there are about 1,000 of politicians down in Washington, D.C. There are 200 million adults in this country. Why we are letting them get away with what they are, why we're not marching in the streets, why we are not actually down there physically extracting them from their offices and firing them. I mean, if we had employees in our individual businesses that were treating us like our government employees are treating us, they would be fired. They'd be out. We have come to this position in our thinking that they are the government and they are in control. And unfortunately, that old saying of the people get the government that they deserve, apathy and lack of participation has led to this particular point in time. And unless we do something to change that and reverse the tide and put the government back into the position where they should be, which is our servant and working for us, we're going to get the government that we deserve.
If there were any one thing that I could change, I think it would be to go back to a true constitutional form of government in which there would be true accountability. The problem we have right now is that the judicial system is not accountable. The executive system is not accountable. And so therefore we have a government run amok that controls its people with many, many regulations and laws, many of which are not constitutional. So to return to a constitutional form of government is an absolute. We have to do that. And without that, we have no hope.
Why are we so naive to think in this country that we have a government of, by, and for the people, when time and time again you look at the people that are in power and it's always the same families? I mean, look at the Bush family. I mean, we're talking a century now that family has been in power. And common sense also will tell you that if we have in this country public servants, the elected officials, they like to call themselves public servants. Well, common sense again. The governor lives in a governor's mansion, okay? The senators, the representatives, the president, elected officials, they all have chauffeur-driven limousines. A congressman or a congresswoman need only serve one term, and they get retirement for life. They have health insurance and benefits, and they have limousines. Wait a second, they're supposed to be the public servants, and yet they're living in mansions, and they go to work in great big hallowed halls of marble and glass. If they're the servants, and we're the masters, why are they living like kings, and the rest of us live like paupers? These are questions that are so basic and common, and yet no one ever asks these things. This is the structure that has been basically put into power and continues today, and the powers that be are not going to give it up without a fight.
First of all, you have to understand what is going on. Secondly, you have to learn how to present it to others. You've got to educate people. You'll talk to them, maybe they're not going to want to listen to you. Your job is not to convince them. Your job is to tell them the truth and try to get them to begin to think, because as things get worse, and they are going to get worse, why we hope that down the line they're going to begin to remember what you say. And then I would honestly believe that we have to be active as far as the political process is concerned, realizing that the political process has been corrupted, that through the voting machines and through the control of the media, they are largely able to control the electoral process. But if we can start simply in one city, if we can start in one precinct or one district or one county or in one state, we can gradually begin to move towards taking America back.
Up until this century, the year 2000, if you didn't like what was going on, you just moved. You got away from it and started off again. Got your little house on the prairie and lived your own life. The problem today is there's no place to go. We're going to have to turn and we're going to have to confront Big Brother. And we're going to have to struggle if we're going to maintain our individual liberty and freedom.
Unfortunately, with the technologies that are currently in place, in terms of the vaccine registries that are trying to be passed on a state-by-state basis to track people from cradle to grave, with the DNA types of tracking that is being implemented, with the RFID types of technologies that are being advanced in a huge agenda in a very rapid way, I fear that what could be coming 5 years down the road would be a show me your papers types of society, that you won't be able to move, you won't be able to travel, buy, sell, or trade, go to the grocery store, go see your doctors without being able to show your ID card, your RFID tag, something that gives some sort of complete identification that you are now bought, sold, and controlled by our government.